It is truly my special pleasure now to introduce the conference dinner keynote speaker. We're delighted to have with us General Michael Hayden, a man who has held some of the highest and most important positions in our government, even before, but especially after September 11th. It is particularly gratifying to have General Hayden here, as we know he has been recently actively and publicly engaged in explaining some of the methods used in the interrogation of terror suspects. Even though this is clearly not tonight's topic, I suspect that there may be some connection to our topic as well. Now, General Hayden is the principal of the Chertoff Group, a security consultancy formed by former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff. In that capacity, General Hayden uses his broad geographic and political knowledge to work with clients on intelligence matters worldwide that may affect their business, including developments in cybersecurity, obviously. In addition to his work with the Chertoff Group, General Hayden serves as a distinguished visiting professor at George Mason University's School of Public Policy. He's also writing a book about his experiences and is a frequent speaker. General Hayden's current work arises from his long and distinguished service in the government. As director of the Central Intelligence Agency, General Hayden was responsible for overseeing the collection of information concerning the plans, intentions, and capabilities of America's adversary. Based on that information, he was then expected to produce timely analysis for those who made the political and military decisions. And just like we may imagine, ultimately the CIA director was also responsible for covert operations to thwart terrorists and other enemies of the United States. Now, even before he became the director of the CIA, General Hayden held some of the highest positions in the US government, on the civilian and the military side. He served as the country's first principal deputy director of national intelligence, and as a four-star general, he was the highest-ranking intelligence officer in the armed forces. Earlier, he had been the commander of the Air Intelligence Agency, director of the Joint Command and Control Warfare Center, director of the National Security Agency, and chief of the Central Security Service. And I suspect how little do we sometimes pay attention to all these security agencies that are out there. For the service of the country, General Hayden has received numerous commendations, including the Defense Distinguished Service Medal and a Bronze Star. Foreign governments have also bestowed commendations of merit upon him. Perhaps more interestingly, the Pittsburgh neighborhood in which he grew up named a major highway after him. And that leads to Heinz Field, the stadium in which his team, the Steelers, are playing. And we don't, those of you who don't believe in them don't have to comment. Now, General Hayden holds a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in modern American history, both from Duquesne University. He also did postgraduate work at the Defense Intelligence School conducted by the Defense Intelligence Agency. I think we are truly delighted to have him with us and very honored to have him as our keynote speaker tonight.
Well, this is a pretty happy occasion until that Patriot fan at the table made that comment that let all the air out of the ball. You know what I mean? Thanks for the opportunity to come chat. I'm going to try to commit some interesting things up here in the next 30 minutes. And I think, Margaret, the agenda has an opportunity to ask some questions before we're done? Okay, good. Great. This is a fascinating topic for me because I kind of lived it. And I'm also a citizen of this great republic. And what we're talking about here this weekend are fundamental issues that we've had in front of us since our colonial days. And I guess one of the things I appreciated out of the first two sessions is, we did not characterize this, as some do, as kind of a combat between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. None of us have seen a necessity to demonize the other side. As I said, this has been a constant discussion for all free peoples, but it's been highlighted for these free peoples here in the United States. I was up in British Columbia a couple of years ago, and it was the Provincial Convention on Privacy. And they had the former director of America's National Security Agency there, kind of an unnatural act. And I defined privacy this way. I said, privacy is the line we continuously negotiate between ourselves as unique creatures of God and ourselves as social animals. And then in the first category, we have a right to keep things to ourselves. And in the second category, we have a responsibility to reveal things about ourselves to the larger community for the greater good. And frankly, you pick up the texts of Madison and Hamilton and Adams and Jefferson, you get the same kind of debate. Where should that line be drawn? This past summer, I was out at a place called the Grove for it's actually a long-term camping thing for rich white guys, okay? And I was the middle weekend lakeside speaker, which apparently is a really primo spot. And I said to them, we've kind of tacked back and forth on this, back Revolutionary period. You and I thought the king had too much power. I've got a lot of British friends. There are a range of views on that, okay? But you and I thought King George had too much power. And then we win the war and we create the Articles of Confederation. And after a very short period of time, we decide we've not given the government enough power. And so a bunch of folks, many from around here, go up to Philadelphia in 1789 and create a much stronger centralized government. But then a whole bunch of the other folks who were involved in the revolution thing don't accept the 1789 thing until you give me a Bill of Rights that lists the limitations. I mean, did you see how this keeps going back and forth? I mean, for our purposes, it's about unreasonable search and seizure. What constitutes reasonableness when it comes to the sovereign authority gathering data or information or things from the citizens of the republic that form us? And we go back and forth even today. I was struck was the word I was going to use, but I think the right word is stunned. After the Boston Marathon thing, and we later learned that the Tsarnaevi were surfing jihadist websites, and a significant fraction of our population, and not all of them wearing tinfoil on their heads, a significant fraction of our population says, why weren't you tracking those guys on the web? As if it was a good idea for the nation's security services to be aware of what permanent legal residents and United States citizens were actually doing when they were doing web surfing. So we kind of go back and forth. How we decide that what constitutes reasonableness is actually a product of the totality of circumstances in which we find ourselves in history. In other words, I know this is fact. What I viewed as reasonableness on the morning of September 10th, I viewed in a very different light on the afternoon of September 11th at the National Security Agency, and I actually started to do different things. And I didn't need to ask Mother May I from the Congress or the President or anyone else. It was within my charter, but in terms of the mature judgment of what's reasonable and what's not reasonable, okay, the death of 3,000 countrymen kind of tilted me in a direction over here, perfectly within my authorities, but a different place than the one in which I was located before the attacks take place. So if we're going to draw this line, I think we have to understand that it's kind of a movable feast here. It moves back based upon, I mean this seriously, the totality of circumstances. But that's really hard to decide. And it's really hard to decide now. Let me just kind of list the reasons why this has been so damnably difficult for us. Number one is secrecy. I get it. I know more about this than many people in the room. And I'm actually quite comfortable with it. And my belief is you'd be more comfortable with it too if I could tell you more stuff. So why can't I tell you more stuff? And the answer to that question is, if I tell you more stuff, then my stuff isn't worth doing in the first place. In other words, I haven't figured out a way to whisper in the ear of 350 million of my countrymen what it is we're doing without tipping our hand to those against whom we're doing this in the first place. So secrecy, it gets in the way, and it will permanently get in the way. It gets too much in the way right now. I think we can do better at this, but it will always be an issue. The fact-based discussion right now is also suffering from the fact that it's not happening in isolation. Mike Rogers, now a radio commentator, but prior to that, chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Chairman Rogers used to describe this Snowden thing, the 215, 702 stuff, happening inside a larger perfect storm. And he just kind of rattles off, what is or is not going on at the IRS, okay? What it does or doesn't mean when the president claims the right to determine when Congress is or is not in recess, so he can make recess appointments. The whole question of the EPA passing environmental regulations inconsistent with the will of Congress expressed in what laws Congress decided not to support. And then finally, a campaign run on the slogan, "We can't wait." I don't mean to be political here. I don't mean that at all. But we have seen recently, and not just in the last 6 years, we have seen an accrual of executive power. And there's been a pushback against that executive power. And this whole NSA thing is nested right in the middle of that broader societal question. And it makes it much harder to isolate and discuss the NSA thing just on its own merits. This whole debate, this fact-based discussion, what constitutes reasonableness, I frankly think has been badly harmed by the way the Snowden stuff has been rolled out. And we already heard today that, Glenn Greenwald did his own picking and choosing in terms of what are the Snowden revelations he would make public, in what parts of specific documents he would push out there. I debated Greenwald in Toronto back in May. It was Mike Hayden and Alan Dershowitz on one side. Who would have thought that? Okay. And Glenn Greenwald and the young fellow who started Reddit on the other. It was like hockey night in Canada without a puck. Greenwald was fond of saying things, and Poitras, Laura Poitras, fond of accusing NSA of suspicionless surveillance. And let me just reflect on that just for a second. That's almost a nonsense comment for somebody with my background. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I don't suspect anybody. I am simply going out there to retrieve information that keeps my countrymen free and safe. This is not about guilt. In fact, let me be really clear, okay? NSA doesn't just listen to bad people. NSA listens to interesting people. People who are communicating information. The information is what we're pursuing. Information to keep you safe and free. I got a travel agent in location A talking to a travel agent in location B about the travel of terrorist C. I'm jumping on the comm. I'm intercepting the communication between these two innocents because that information that they're communicating is useful to keeping you free and safe. Greenwald, Poitras, and others have used the language of law enforcement and justice in order to describe and criticize foreign intelligence collection. And this may intrigue you enough that you ask a question or two about it in the Q&A period. I don't care. Let me put you in another lane here and just give you a sense of this, all right? People come to me and say, do you think people at Guantanamo should be tried in military commissions or in Article III courts? And my answer is, I don't give a damn. just give me a chance to talk to him first. I am not a law enforcement agency. I've never been part of law enforcement. I'm part of foreign intelligence. That operates under different roles. So that's Greenwald and Poitras, very agended. Someone mentioned today that Greenwald self-described as an advocacy journalist. There's some good journalists out there rolling out Snowden stuff. Bart Gellman from the Washington Post is another. Bart actually calls NSA. And Greenwald and Poitras don't. But Bart will say, I got this, talk to me, tell me, it's kind of stop me before I kill again. Let me know if this is really, if I don't recognize how much harm to security this is going to do, which frankly is a very responsible step on his part. But even Bart gets it wrong. Let me kind of roll this out because it's an important point. Snowden certainly stimulated a necessary debate, a point made 3 or 4 times in the last 2 panels. But he also distorted a necessary debate. Let me do this conversation, this rollout that Bart Gellman had. August 15th, a couple of years ago, Bart had a front page above the fold story in the Washington Post. Bold headline, NSA violates privacy thousands of times per year. Okay? So I did a little research. I actually wrote a kind of a counter op-ed, which I'm going to get to the fine print about in a minute. But let me tell you what I said about Bart's. And by the way, Bart and I have been on debating stages down at Duke, up at American University a couple of times. So we know each other really well. I pointed out that the violations that Gellman pointed out were all the incidents were inadvertent. No one claimed that any rules were intentionally violated. All the incidents were discovered, reported, and corrected by NSA itself. Thousands of violations per year, right? Fully 2/3 of the violations were comprised of what NSA calls roamers. These are legitimately targeted foreigners who were temporarily in the United States and thus temporarily treated as U.S. persons, protected by the Fourth Amendment. So picture a cell phone call, not collected in the air here, all right, but made by one of these individuals who were legitimately targeting overseas, but he's now in the United States, and that cell phone call is routed back to pick your place, Portugal, Norway, Pakistan, and it's routed back there because Norway, Portugal, or Pakistan wants to bill them. All right? So it goes back through the switch there so they can actually tack the fee on, and then that call comes back across the Atlantic with the call number identifier being the foreign number, coming across the Atlantic back to the United States, looking every inch like a foreign-based call to the National Security Agency. There's nothing in the call's content or the physics of the intercept that it's being made here until, of course, the content of the call reveals something like, I'm down here in Battery Park, the view over to Governor's Island spectacular, and I'm going to eat dinner uptown tonight. At which point NSA discovers, oh, expletive. This foreign target is now in the United States, and the inadvertent collection has to stop. 2/3 of the privacy violations that Bart said took place were roamers. Other violations included database queries. That means searches of data already collected. The document that Bart relied on was an internal NSA document, reveals that in one quarter, there were 115 incidents of queries that were incorrectly entered, mistyping, transposed numbers, using too broad search terms, and so on. 115 incidents that were part of his thousands of incidents per year. That's 115 out of 61 million that quarter. So let me give you an alternative headline for Bart's piece. NSA violated privacy thousands of times. How about this headline? NSA damn near perfect. An additional reason why this debate has become more difficult than it should have been, and I freely admit this, is that our government has been absolutely flat-footed in responding to the kinds of things that have been put out there. I mentioned this Bart Gellman thing in the Washington Post on August 15th. So August 16th, the day after it, USA Today calls the National Security Agency, says we're going to run a he said she said on Monday on our editorial page. We're writing the he said about how bad this is, and NSA, we want to be kind of fair here, so NSA, why don't you write the she said? And this is beyond my view. I do not know this is going on. About 11 o'clock Saturday night, I get a phone call from a young woman named Katie Montgomery, who runs the public affairs branch of the Chertoff Group. It says, we just got a call from USA Today. They want you to write the she said for the he said of and so on and so forth. I go, Katie, it's 11 o'clock Saturday night. No. But then Katie tells me the rest of the story. NSA took on the responsibility to write the she said. NSA crafted the she said. NSA, quote, cannot get their response cleared through the interagency, unquote. That's French. Let me translate the French for you. The White House won't let them do it. So I said to Katie, all right, okay, fine, I'll do it. So I got up the next morning, made my wife her coffee, took it up, a little Nespresso machine there, really good, up there. Got her up about 30 minutes early for church, and I sat down on my kitchen counter with my kitchen laptop, and I wrote 600 words of English prose, pushing back on the Gelman article. This is too self-referential, I'm begging forgiveness now, all right? But it's the only way I can tell the story. I wrote 600 words of English prose 10 years out of the National Security Agency, pushing back on the Gelman article. I've got to send it to CIA to get cleared for security. They clear it about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, which is very generous because they don't normally work on Sunday. I toss it to USA Today about 2:30. About 4 o'clock, the USA Today op-ed page editor calls me back. She says, we want to really thank you. We just didn't want it to be he said. We wanted he said, she said. This is really, really well crafted. Thank you very much. I hope you don't mind. We changed a fair amount of our he said based upon your she said. I already told you it's too self-referential, okay? I'm sorry. But the point I'm trying to suggest to you is this isn't that hard. And we did a horrible job trying to explain what it was we were doing to the broader American public. We let the story get way out from underneath us. I mean, I sat there on Fox News Sunday with Justin Amash, the Republican Tea Party guy from Grand Rapids. I mean, it's like we were living in alternative universes in terms of his description of what NSA was doing and my knowledge of what NSA actually does. I guess there's one other reason why the government's response to this was horribly flat-footed, and it really came out today. Stephen mentioned it a couple of times. But let me kind of play it back for you. Out of the grand compromise of the 1970s, which, as Stephen suggested to you, was a really unusual thing. I mean, in practically every other Western democracy, intelligence collection is the province of the executive. Okay? But coming out of Church Pike and all of that kerfluffle, it was decided in our democracy that we were going to share governance. We were going to share oversight of intelligence collection with the other branches of government. So what you get are the House and Senate Permanent Select Committees on Intelligence, and you get the FISA court. Right? A reason I think the government, NSA's response, let me narrow it down. A reason NSA was so slow out of the gate in trying to explain itself was NSA thought they were cool. NSA thought they were good to go because this program had been authorized by the president, had been approved by Congress, was overseen by both the HPSI and the CISI. And by the way, did you notice who the strongest supporters of these programs were? It was the chair and ranking member of the two intelligence committees. So, approved by the president, authorized by the Congress, by bipartisan majorities multiple times and overseen by the federal court system in the FISA court. Executive, legislative, judicial, church, pike, grand compromise. Check, check, check. This is a Madisonian trifecta. They had it all. And it wasn't enough. Now, the discussion today in the panel was that it wasn't enough because the oversight mechanism was broken. I'm not so sure. Okay, again, back to my point. Feinstein, Chambliss, Ruppersberger, Rogers, the oversight chair and rankings were the strongest supporters of the program. They knew the program. I don't know. Look, I'm willing to entertain the arguments, all right? But I'm not so sure the cause of this issue, the high fever, came out of the judgment that the oversight process was broken. I think it came out of something different. I think it came out of a fundamental cultural change. Back at CIA, way pre-Snowden, this is 07, maybe early 08. I've got a civilian advisory board, kind of like folks like many people here in the room. We ask to come in, they're very generous. We usually keep their names private. I've gotten permission to reveal one name to you, Carly Fiorina. Carly was on the advisory board. I gave the advisory board tough questions like, how come I'm paying so much for my IT? Or, how can I recruit to not only look like America, but to look like America's enemies? The question I gave Carly, however, was much more difficult than the other two. The question I gave to Carly was this. Carly, I've been thinking. Is America going to be able to conduct espionage in the future? Espionage, an activity that requires secrecy for its success. Is America going to be able to conduct espionage in the future inside a broader political culture that every day demands more transparency and more public accountability for every aspect of national life? And Carly took her team and went off to the mountaintop and talked to folks like yourselves, came back 3 or 4 months later, said, Mike, we got an answer. Okay, great. I walked across the hall in the 7th deck of CIA, sat down in the conference room and said, okay, Carly, will America be able to conduct espionage inside a broader political culture that every day demands more transparency and more public accountability from every aspect of national life? And Carly looked me right in the eye and said, not clear. Which is actually a very, very powerful answer. And we're seeing the, kind of the next wave of that in the response to the Snowden revelations, because a bunch of our countrymen, and again, not the wingnuts, a lot of people in the center, a lot of very thoughtful members of our body politic are saying, all right, the president, the Congress, and the courts are on board, but that doesn't constitute consent of the governed anymore. That's consent of the governors. You told them, but you didn't tell me. And fundamentally, I think that's the crisis in oversight. Not whether or not Mike Rogers passed on Jim Clapper's letter in 2011 that said, hey, you know, we're collecting all your metadata, right? Which, by the way, Jim wrote, and Mike did not pass on to all the other members of Congress. So this is a tough issue. By the way, if we hack our way through all this underbrush, all right, and we kind of get to the facts of the case, okay, we actually have a really true sight picture, that also may not be good enough. I said this at the Oxford Union almost a year ago today, right? I said to the British students gathered there that, you know, you're all coming into the movie late in the third reel, and you're looking at what's on the screen and you're convinced the butler did it. But, you know, you might want to stay for the second showing, or maybe if it's a DVR, kind of hit the thing and run it back and watch the movie from the beginning, because what it is you're seeing may not have the same meaning you think it has because you've come in on the last act. I'll be very brief about this because I want to leave time for questions. But let me hit 2 or 3 points, okay? For most of the life of NSA, y'all were pretty enthusiastic about our intercepting the communications of the Soviet Union, okay? And one of our targets in the Soviet Union was SRF, Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces, guys with the ICBMs. And they used to transmit their orders out of SRF headquarters in Moscow through microwave shots up over the Urals to Soviet ICBM fields in the Far East, out on the steppes. And we were all over that network. Okay? We were intercepting communications 24 hours a day, looking, I must admit, looking for words of interest, like launch, or there isn't a civil libertarian alive who gave a damn about that. The 21st century equivalent of those Soviet SRF signals on that isolated microwave network jumping over the Ural Mountains are proliferator, drug trafficker, terrorist communications, pretty much existing in emails, in a global integrated telecommunications grid, coexisting with your Gmail and your Hotmail. And so the fundament I want to give you here is, if you want these guys to do what they did for you in the 70s and 80s, they got to be on networks where your stuff is. And that's just the way it is. A second reality. This hit me when I became director of NSA in '99. We were being overwhelmed by data. We just think of your own community. Look, like, all you college students, you don't remember this, but the other folks remember this. Remember your communications patterns 25 years ago? Remember you used to have to wait till 6 o'clock on a Sunday night to make that call? Yeah. None of your students understand that. Okay, but we did, because communications were sparse and expensive, and now they're not. And NSA was being overwhelmed by the volume, variety, and velocity of global communications. And we were sitting there kind of on the beach, kind of doing the Heisman thing, all right, trying to stop this tsunami of communications coming at us. And we decided about 99, way pre-Snowden, way pre-9/11, about 99 is, we ain't stopping that wave. That wave is going to overwhelm us. I have an idea. Turn around and swim with it. Turn around and use volume for your advantage. The word for that is bulk collection. And then applying metadata analysis to the bulk collection. Pre-9/11. What I'm trying to suggest to you is the things that Snowden revealed were not things kind of sitting in the lower right-hand desk drawer out at the NSA headquarters. With the NSA director just waiting for the opportunity to be able to pull them out and spring them on the, kind of like Mr. Burns in one of the Simpsons. Excellent, we can do metadata. It was a logical response to a technological demand in order to continue to do what the agency has historically done. And then third reality, besides commingling of communications in bulk, was simply the erosion of the concept of geography. Right? We used to think that there was a clear distinction between foreign and domestic intelligence and law enforcement. So 19 guys living in America killed 3,000 of us. And so there was a question about the enemy is inside the gates. And all your talk today about 215, 215 is such a safe haven. 215 is legislated by Congress. I was doing metadata collection under the President's raw Article 2 authorities from October 7th, 2001 forward. The 215 program doesn't begin with the Patriot Act. It begins with the private order I got from President Bush. And we decided it was lawful and consistent with the President's authorities as Commander-in-Chief, because the enemy was inside the gate, and we knew of no other way to identify that enemy that had less of an impact on your privacy than collecting metadata, but addressing it only under very limited circumstances. And by the way, when the enemy wasn't inside the gate, 215, his emails were 702. Look, there's nothing American about a communication, an email communication on Gmail between a bad man in Pakistan and a bad man in Yemen that is sitting on a server in Redmond, Washington. There is nothing American about it other than it's sitting on a server in Redmond, Washington. And that's the 702 program. Now, I told the folks at Oxford, and I'll repeat to you here, after I've now all explained this, it is a reasonable conclusion on any of your parts to simply say, I got it, Hayden, I understand why you do it. I hate it. Don't do it anymore. I got it. But let's start with why that was done and what the costs were in not doing it. I love the last panel, and Ashley talking about the international dimension of this. I actually didn't have it in the talk, but I just, here it comes. So, almost a year ago now, in addition to the trip to Oxford, I'm in Munich for the Munich Security Conference. And I mean, the Germans are in high dudgeon about this whole Snowden thing, all right? So I am an official panelist at the Munich Security Conference at the Hotel Bayerischerhof in downtown Munich. Pay no attention to the fact that the panel started at 10:30 at night and was in the bar of the hotel. It was on the agenda. And I'm there with Jane Harman, a German-American telecommunications executive, August Honning, who was my counterpart in BND. August is now retired. And then the fair and balanced moderator was from Der Spiegel. Okay. And so we're going through the, what are you Americans doing? So the fairly early in the conversation, the question of the chancellor's cell phone became a topic of conversation. So we're talking about I'm not admitting anything, all right? You know, if these stories are true, whatever. So it's in the dark. I mean, we're literally up on the stage in the bar, the nightclub stage of the bar, and it's dark out there. It's 10:30, pushing 11. People are swallowing pills, eating pommes frites. It's a really loose crowd. And I hear this German accented voice in English say to me, well, I guess I should aspire to be chancellor, and therefore you Americans will not listen to me. And I couldn't resist responding, well, to be perfectly accurate, President Obama has promised only not to listen to this chancellor. And I was fairly unapologetic because I thought I was talking to adults. This is what nation states do. And the story I told them, I will tell you. All right. When candidate Obama won the election, and this has been mentioned, perhaps not in our session, but I've heard it on recent newscasts. This is a cyber smart president of the United States. I mean, he ran his campaign from his BlackBerry, and we went up to the president-elect after the election, not me personally. We said, this BlackBerry thing's not a good idea, Mr. President-elect. You really can't be doing that BlackBerry thing. And the president responded. He actually said this on CNBC. It actually sounds almost like a Second Amendment bumper sticker. He actually said on CNBC, they're going to have to pry it from my fingers. So we said, okay, he's probably going to be president since he did carry Ohio. So he's going to keep his BlackBerry. So we then said to him, could we borrow it like for 36 hours? And we did. And, you know, we did some stuff. What's the backstory? What's the backstory to that flippant, cartoonish tale, nonetheless true, that I just told you? The backstory is this. We were fully prepared to tell the soon-to-be most powerful man in the most powerful nation on earth that if he used a BlackBerry in his national capital, his texts, his emails, and his phone calls would be subject to intercept by multiple foreign intelligence agencies. That's what adult nations do to one another, and that was the message I had to the Germans. We talked a lot today, and it was really interesting. And Ashley gave some really good comment on this as well, about the whole question of international privacy. I mean, so we're kind of hyperventilating about 215 and what does that mean? But there are other folks who are concerned about what NSA might do to citizens of foreign nations, okay? Truth in lending here, all right? We Americans in the National Security Agency and the National Security Structure, we have historically been Manichaean about the rest of the world. Are you or are you not protected by the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? Are you? Oh my God, we can't touch you. Are you not? Game on. Now, that has run into a legitimate foreign view that privacy should not be the sole province of the citizenship of the nation of which you are a part, but that you as a human being enjoy some measure, some privacy is owed to you simply because of your status as a human being. Now, I will freely admit that's a legitimate principle, and it's real fuzzy. Okay? And so we'll see how that evolves going forward, and how we Americans will begin to treat that. Now, President Obama launched a group that's going to report out in about 3 weeks about how it is we could extend the kinds of protections we give you to foreigners whose communications have been intercepted and stored by the National Security Agency. When we do that, among the Western democracies, that will make one of us. We will be the only one who has ever seriously considered that question. I love the sidebar discussion in the second panel today. Let me put an exclamation point on some of the comments that were made. European parliamentarians know far more about the National Security Agency and GCHQ than they do about their own security services, period. And we need to keep that in mind as we enter these international debates. Okay, that's enough chum in the water. Generates questions. You know that talk out there I said I gave at the Grove and the Lakeside thing and all that? I ended up, I don't think I have to do it with you, but I'm going to repeat to you what I said to them. I said, so here's the thing. We're going out for the coin toss. I got Captain Jefferson over here. I got Captain Hamilton over here. All right. I turn to Captain Jefferson. Captain Jefferson, you are indeed the home team. You will call it in the air. My point to the crowd was, game on. Don't be a spectator. Be part of the contest. Thanks, and I'll be happy to take any questions I may or may not have generated. Thank you.
Judge Walton seemed very upset about that, seemed to feel it was a violation of 215, and he took steps to prevent it in the future. Do you think Judge Walton was right?
Yeah. So what was the first half of your question? Oh, why you can query. Okay, so the metadata in 215, and this is really important because most of our countrymen don't get this. You can't mine that metadata. You can't launch algorithms against it. You can't do anything with that metadata from 215, which is your stuff, other than NSA is allowed to query it with a foreign phone number, almost always foreign, about which they have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that that foreign phone number is affiliated with Al-Qaeda and affiliated organizations. So you got this ocean of metadata swimming around. You get this, you roll up a safe house in Yemen, you grab a cell phone that you've never seen before, you get to say, hey, anybody in there talk to this number? And suddenly some number in Providence raises its hand and says, well, yeah, you kind of talk to him every Thursday. Then NSA gets to say, well, who the hell you talk to? At which point NSA is done. That's it. That's the end of the program. Now, with other metadata, which is collected under 12333, the foreign intelligence collection, rather than under the special provisions of the Patriot Act, they're truly foreign. NSA is restricted, I think, to 5 or 6 categories of intelligence that can be used to retain the metadata. Frankly, I can drive a truck through those 5 or 6. It's the waterfront, okay? And so they get to retain it. Tell me the last half of the question again.
So when we use, instead of several hundred...
Oh, okay, yeah, Judge Walton, yeah. So to the best of my knowledge, all right, I'm out of government when this happens. To the best of my knowledge, here's what happened. So you got this gajillion phone records in the database, right? And you all remember I started this, right? Okay. And it's a lot. But you can only query it with a reasonable articulable suspicion. Okay. Apparently what happened was, so it's a production line, it's a bureaucracy. So you got the reasonable articulable suspicion bin, and you got the not ready for prime time numbers that you're looking at trying to build the case about reasonable articulable suspicion that they're affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And that's an infinitely larger field than, and as you pointed out, in 2012, the number was 222. Okay? And so you got this massive field. And somebody in NSA had the bright idea that as they were getting the data dump every day from the telecoms, remember the first Snowden revelation was the Verizon FISA. As they're getting the data dump from the telecoms, wouldn't it be cool if that data was just kind of streaming into that gajillion record database, then we just kind of put a little filter on it here, okay, that had the not yet ready for prime time numbers on it, so that if any of those went ding, we would take that not ready for prime time and take it and put it at the top of the list, because after all, it's just called the United States, put it at the top of the list to see if we could build an articulable case that it was associated with Al-Qaeda. That's it. That's a violation, but it's not quite the same thing as figuring out who was phoning an abortionist or all the other accusations that were made. To the best of my knowledge, that was the foul that Judge Walton discovered. NSA should have had a tighter ship. This is so complicated that sometimes there are things going on that not everybody is totally aware of. And you got some folks who said, hey, oh, we're not changing on the number. We're just seeing if that number shows up, if it flows into the... You see the dynamic. Anyway, that's pretty much what happened. No. NSA is sweeping in data without regard to race, creed, or place of origin. Okay? It's all of it. It's mine, it's yours, it is absolutely indifferent. All they want to do is get it all. Now, footnote, they're not getting it all. All right? Right now they're getting about 30%. Because the mechanisms they're using to do this, when I started it, most everybody was still using landlines. And so you had mechanisms that the phone companies were very comfortable with putting the data in. Now we're all using cell phones. And the mechanisms are not well geared to collect the cell phone data. So it's actually a smaller fraction. But look, if NSA could get it all, they get it all. But it's all. And the really powerful point that everyone needs to recognize is the energy field to do something about any of those numbers doesn't emanate from within those numbers. Okay, so the fact that your wife is not a U.S. citizen is indifferent. In fact, according to U.S. law, she enjoys all the protections you do because she's in the United States. The stimulus for doing something, she's there? Okay, and yeah, I suppose. But the stimulus to look at that data, to do anything with that data, comes external from the data. It's not an algorithm launched against, well, we know this is a pattern of behavior of terrorist communications, so let's just run this powerful algorithm through these, trillion data fields. That doesn't happen. I was intrigued by the discussion this afternoon about the distinction between collection and use. And the NSA argument was, this is not unreasonable because of its use. And now I understand there's an argument about its collection, and we have to have that discussion. But NSA's argument is, no, it can't be viewed as unreasonable. Look at how we use it. Sir.
So, we're talking about the 3-hop rule that used to exist and now the 2-hop rule from the seat identifier. First of all, I'm curious, your opinion, is 2 hops enough?
Yeah.
And more importantly, was the 3-hop rule when it existed run by the oversight committee? And if so, did they approve it? Or did they say that?
So I got a dirty number in Yemen. The number in Providence says, yeah, I talked to him. Okay, under the 3-hop rule, you get to go 1, 2, 3 out from the Providence number, out from the, which then looks like a real complicated spider web. And under the 2-hop rule, you get to go 1, 2. All right. When I was doing the terrorist surveillance program, which was this before the Protect America, before the Patriot Act had the provisions for 215. When I would brief Congress, I was absolutely clear that we were going out 3 hops. Okay? And so I assume that when it was put under statute, it was explained that it was going out 3 hops. President Obama, entirely for cosmetic reasons, because there are no constitutional imperatives that say 2 is good, 3 is bad, entirely for cosmetic reasons, pulled it back from 3 to 2 hops. I will give you the professional judgment that preserved about 85% of the effectiveness of the program. And, you know, in the real world where politics matter, that's okay.
So, you've mentioned a number of times that it's your view that people aren't running machine learning algorithms across this data. That's, of course, what we do with the data. If one were to misuse this data, and you asserted that it's not being used in that way, but if one were to misuse this data and run machine learning algorithms across it, what could one do if one decided to ignore the law?
I suspect one could do what Amazon does with similar data, you know, in terms of predictive behavior of large group. Well, but you asked me what was technically possible, and it would be what Amazon could do, which is it could predict large trends in activity, which is good for marketing, not all that good for intelligence, which needs more precise information. But to repeat, it's not done. I was in Aspen for a Charlie Rose thing, October a year ago. It was me and Eric Schmidt, John Scarlett, British counterpart, and Keith Alexander couldn't get out of the city, so he had to do it from a TV screen. And it was all about 215. And Eric Schmidt ran to our defense, saying that you can do all sorts of stuff with the algorithm. This is really useful, and I understand why these guys want to do this, and it's really good to keep America safe because you can do all sorts of stuff with the algorithms. At which point Keith and I said, we agree with you, Eric, but that's not what we're doing. We're prohibited from doing that. All we can do is query the database and say, did any of you guys talk to this number? And that's as far as it goes.
General Snippo, as you know, one of the common themes of reform proposals is on the process side to make at least 215, 702 and other non-individualized, non-Title I FISA cases more adversarial before the FISA court. Do you view as to the wisdom of those proposals and as to if they're going to be implemented, what would be the most effective way to do it?
Yeah. You know, the president's speech about a year ago now, he's going to do an anniversary thing here, I think, coming up pretty soon at the archives. It was a really interesting speech. It's divided into thirds. The last third was about foreigners, and I've already kind of been disrespectful for them, so I'll pass over that. The first third was, this stuff works, it's lawful, I'm glad I did it. The middle third was, but I know you're uncomfortable, so I want to make some changes. And I'm talking to you from the heart. The changes have been designed to make the general public more comfortable with what's going on. And I get it. It's a democracy. That matters, all right? But it was not because of previous violations. This program has only been used for the purposes for which it was designed, all right? And none of the changes that have been suggested, I think, are going to actually make that much difference. Now, to come to your point, Do you want an adversarial process in the FISA court? And did you read my and Mike Mukasey's op-ed? Yeah, that argument there against the advocate was Mike's, not mine, all right? But then again, he's a judge and the Attorney General, so if he's got a point about why a FISA adversarial process is not a good idea, I'm not messing with his prose. I mean, he put it in there. As an intel guy, I don't want an advocate there for specific warrants. Tony Soprano doesn't get one. Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti shouldn't get one. I'm willing to entertain that when the court is going to decide a programmatic question, that an adversarial process might have some merit, if for no other reason than to make everyone understand this was a fair engagement. Yeah. Two more, maybe not. Sir.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand in maybe simpler terms, which will help me, what you mean when you say no algorithm analysis, we're doing, you talk to him, you talk to him. And then you do the analogy to the NSA's classic Cold War mission of monitoring data from the Soviet Union. It sounds to me like what you're talking about is net reconstruction, and that the analytical component of that product is part of other information that's done at another level. That the NSA is providing the information of the net and reconstructing where the communications are going to contribute to a broader analytical process involving a potential target. And if that's the case, then if your focus is like classic net reconstruction, then you've got to be on the net.
Everything you described, we can quibble over an adjective or a verb here or there. Everything you described, I think, is a fair description of what NSA does against foreign targets. It is not what it does with the 215 database, which is we know it's domestic, all right? And so our objective here is merely to get in the softest invasion of privacy way possible to identify connections between known, reasonable, articulable suspicion, foreign terrorist targets with a communicant in the United States. And that's it. We simply give that bad number in Yemen, talk to this number in Providence, and this is the calling history of that number in Providence. Jim Comey, over to you. Okay, so the normal phrase about this is we need increased transparency. And a case can be made that 215 operationally could have survived more transparency. All right, that you could have shown more leg about this to the public, not just to the Congress. And by the way, the Congress knew. All right, and if the Congress didn't know, blame the Congress. Jim Clapper wrote letters in 2009 and 2011 that specifically said, you know, we're getting it all right. And he sent it with the intent that every member would read it. All right, so that's on them, not on the IC. But back to my cultural problem, that's not enough anymore. It's a broader public awareness that we need to feed. And so I think 215 is one that we could have shown a lot more leg on earlier and rolled it out in a rational way. And I think people would have understood it. I used the transparency word. We need to be more transparent at another conference up in Aspen. And I was up there with Mike Leiter, the head of the National Counterterrorism Center. And Mike, I was here with Eric Olson and John McLaughlin, and it's all about this. And I said, transparency. And by the way, don't kid yourself. The more we tell you, the less effective we're going to be. This is going to shave points off of effectiveness. You know, if you're just looking for the narrow operational effectiveness of the program, wouldn't tell you anything. But, I mean, that's not the criteria. We live in a democracy. I got it. But the more is public, the more the adversary knows and the more the adversary can react. So the more transparent we are, the more we shave points off of operational effectiveness. That's just kind of a law of physics. So I'm talking about transparency. And finally, Leiter interrupted me. Again, the head of the National Counterterrorism Center. And Mike says, you know, Mike, it's not transparency. We need to be translucent. And that's actually really good. When we look through a translucent window, you see the shapes, you see the movements, but you can't see the details. But you know the shapes and the movements, so you've got a reasonably comfortable belief, I kind of know what's going on behind that translucent window. So I think we're going to have to, I just think we're just going to have to be more that way. You bring up something I just feel in conscience bound to continue on, okay? A lot of commentary was made about Jim Clapper and the question from Ron Wyden on that, you know, about mass bulk collection and so on. Jim's answer was horrible, all right? And Jim's an honest guy. He just hosed it horribly. Jim's answer was not as bad as Ron Wyden's question. Everyone on that dais knew the correct answer to that question. Everyone behind everyone on that dais, the staffers, knew the answer to that question. They all knew the 215 program. Ron Wyden was trying to trick Jim Clapper into making an admission of classified information that Ron Wyden didn't have the courage to make himself in open session. Harsh words, nonetheless true. Right? And I really do think we need to keep that. And by the way, why was Wyden trying to get Clapper to say what he was saying? Because Wyden, in the committee, was losing the vote on 215 consistently 15-2. So I go back to maybe it wasn't oversight that was broken, but the fact that our general population is feeling a little more Athenian and wants to be part of direct democracy in approving these programs as opposed to representative democracy. I don't quite know how we do that, but I think that's the fundamental issue. Sorry, I didn't mean to end on a low note, but Jim's a good friend, and he was kind of trashed 2 or 3 times. Horrible answer. I wouldn't have given it, all right? But there's a lot more to the story than Clapper lied. Sir, you'll give me one more to get off the X. Okay.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for all of your service to our nation.
Thanks.
And in terms of, as you sit here today, and in light of the President's State of the Union, looking forward in terms of the intelligence community, trying to keep your countrymen, our countrymen safe, do you have any concerns about the President's proposal to transfer control over the authoritative root servers to a non-government?
This is about control of the internet. This is about ICANN, the Convention on Names and Numbers, and so on. And we're kind of moving in the direction of turning that over from a U.S. entity to a more international entity. I'm going to be really efficient, but it requires a bit of a longer answer. This is all about runs being made at the internet as we know it. The internet as we know it is an American invention, and it reflects us. And it reflects us in the best possible way. Technologically elegant, egalitarian, democratic, unitary, accessible, it's us. You know, 500 years from now, somebody's going to be giving a lecture down here, And somebody's going to say the Americans. And, oh yeah, the internet guys. The same way we say the road people for the Romans, all right? We're going to be remembered for this. A lot of people don't like the internet because of what I just described. They don't like the unitary, accessible, egalitarian, democratic. And these places are called China and Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And they're trying to impose on the digital domain the kind of barriers you and I have become accustomed to in physical space, like borders. Eric Schmidt wrote about this a couple years ago in a book called The New Digital Age, in which he predicted digital visas and digital passports. And I don't mean going online so you can go to Australia. I mean, you got to go and get the permission of .ch to go into .ch, and more troubling, you got to get the permission of .ch to get out of .ch. So you've got this move under a UN body called the ITU, and we're losing votes. I actually think this move to transfer ICANN to another international body comprised of stakeholders, as opposed to the UN, which then makes it fall under Saudi, Iranian, Russian, and Chinese influence, is in essence a backfire, as if we were fighting a forest fire. This is burning our own timber in order to prevent the greater conflagration. That if we're going to hand it off, let's hand it off now on our own terms, rather than having this thing ripped from our hands and then turned into something that would actually destroy the net as we know it. It is not a high probability shot. It could fail, but I'm willing to be understanding as to why we did it.